guys, Shadow the Rat, and for today's video, I'm going to talk about 3 different methods that you can use to distinguish 2 identical rats, and I'm also going to show you how to use one method, but the other 2 I'm just talking about because I don't want to do everything to these poor little rats. Okay, so the first method we're going to talk about is the one I'm going to show you, and that is to use food dye to distinguish 2 rats apart. Now, there's 2 places that people will typically put food dye, and that is on the tail, like you can see, I've already put some on there, and then the other place is on the scruff, which is the back of the neck. Now, the reason we usually choose these places is because rats don't typically groom these places very much. They don't really groom their tail too much, and when they do groom it, it will be at the base or the tip for the most part. So if you put the food dye in the middle, it will likely not be groomed too much, and as such, it will last longer. Just as a side note, food dye is completely safe for rats to ingest. Anything that I talk about today will be safe for them to ingest if you apply it to your rat. And that goes for anything that you put on your rat ever. It needs to be safe for them to ingest because otherwise, well, they're going to ingest some. So if it's not safe for them to ingest, that's going to cause a lot of issues. So in my case, I'm simply putting food dye on the tails. And that's because I don't need to really tell rats apart at a quick glance. If you need to identify a lot of different rats, like let's say 3 or 4 or more rats that look the same, then you probably want to also mark the scruff area, simply because you want to be able to tell them apart when you just look at them at glance. And if you're working in a lab or rescue where a lot of the rats look the same, then this is one of those cases where you will likely end up putting the food dye on both parts of the rat. Now, typically the food dye will last a few weeks, sometimes less depending on if your rats groom it or not, and also how much you put on there. But it's pretty good. I'm sorry, my other girls are being crazy. But it's pretty good at lasting for quite a while, which is really nice, and it's also really easy to reapply. So I'm going to go ahead and put some on these girls. They don't technically need it because one of them is actually developing Himalayan points, but I want to show you how it's done, and it's not going to hurt them at all. It just means their tails will be colored for a few more weeks, which they would be anyhow because, well, they already have some food dye on because when I first got them, they were both completely pink-eyed whites. So let's go ahead and put some on. I'm going to use blue for my rat called Omelet. She's the one with the nose point. And I'm going to use green for my rat called Egg, and she is the true pink-eyed white rat. Now, to do this, I'm just going to take one out real quick so that I can't accidentally get food dye on both of them. And then I'm going to put her in my lap. And as for the other one, I'm going to actually keep her in here so I can dye her tail without getting everything else covered in food dye, because this stuff does stain. Fortunately, it comes out with water, but still, I don't want to stain everything. So let's go ahead and put some on her tail. So I'm just going to hold her in place and lightly put a little bit on her tail. You can probably not see too well what I'm doing, but you can see I'm just putting a little bit on her tail here. I usually wouldn't be holding her like that. I'm just holding her like that because I'm trying to show you that for the video. But then after that, I'm just going to spread it out a little bit. And then once it's on there, I will go ahead and just close the thing. Now, I didn't put very much on there because, again, she doesn't need it. But if she needed it, I would be putting more on there. And I also would put her back in the cage after this. And actually, that's what I'm going to do because I don't want her to get this food dye everywhere. It's okay if she gets a little bit in the cage, but if she gets it all over the carpet, that's going to be a completely different story. So let's put her up. So I put her up, and now I need to dye her sister Egg. So this is Egg. You can see she is a little pink-eyed white rat. And I'm just going to start by holding her gently. You could distract your rat with some yogurt, and I'm going to put a little bit of this food dye on her tail. So it's kind of hard to do this where you can't really see, but I'll put a little bit on there. I'll smooth it out again, and I'm going to close it real quick so I can clean up my hands. So I have a little bit on my hands. I'll wash them after this. Okay, so that's all you have to do. Now you can see her tail has this little green on it. And of course, it will dry a nice green color. But again, I don't want to release her into the carpeted area. So I'm going to put her back in the cage now so that she can dry. I did end up getting a little bit on her back by accident because I wasn't really looking super closely as I was doing this. I was trying to make sure that you could see it on camera. But that won't hurt her again. And if I wanted to get it off, I would just dab at it with some water. Okay, so I put little Egg back in the cage so she wouldn't get her stuff on everything. But here is little Omelet. You can see the food coloring has started to dry and it's clearly reapplied, and she is very distinct from her sister now because she has a blue tail and the other girl has a green tail, although, oh my god, Pickle. Do not get yourself all food dyed, Pickle. But anyways, that's the first method. The second method you can use is using a permanent marker. All you have to do is put a little bit of permanent marker on their tail. You can put it in different places for different rats. It's perfectly safe for them to groom again. And of course, it will last longer than food dye because it doesn't just come out with water. So that is another method. And the third and final method I'm going to talk about is fur clipping. And fur clipping is basically when you clip a little bit of fur from your rat in different places in order to distinguish them from other rats that look the same. And this is is the method usually used with rats with dark colored fur, and the reason for that is because, well, you can't dye a rat that has really dark colored fur. It's not going to show up. So if you can't dye them, then doing some fur clipping can also help, although of course it will grow back with time, so you have to keep an eye on that. Now those are the 3 methods I want to talk about, and I just briefly want to touch on one method that you want to avoid, and that is putting a collar or string or any sort of tied object on them. So I've seen some people mention this before, and it's a really bad idea to put any sort of object like this on your rats, just because they're going to be spending most of their time in the cage, and that means if they have anything on them, they have a pretty decent chance of getting stuck on something and potentially hurting or even strangling themselves. So just avoid putting anything on them that you have to tie on, and instead stick to either using food color, permanent marker, or just clipping some of their fur off. Okay guys, so that's it for this video. Hopefully it was helpful for anyone trying to differentiate between multiple identical looking rats. But yeah, I'm going to end this video here. And again, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!